Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh, I sound a bit deep there, don't I? Thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I love Dundee. I've been here a few times and done some work with Luke. So it's just fantastic to be back. So I'm going to break every rule in the book today. The slide deck that you will receive, basically we have quite a lot of information in it. But what that allows you to do is hopefully, as a standalone slide deck, it will tell its own story. So if you wish to circulate it, you can do so. So don't worry necessarily about taking copious notes. Maybe think about ideas that's been generated, but you will get the information. So a little bit about me to set the context. I look at that picture now, and I think I look so young, but at the time I felt so old. My background was I was a working class mixed race female whose parents had no educational aspirations for me to go on to do A-levels, let alone further education in any way, shape or form. Basically, if I lived under their roof, I had to go out and work. At the age of 21, I left home. And at the age of 24, I decided I would go and get a degree. But I wasn't considered clever enough to go to a university. I went to a polytechnic. But even then, my choices were restricted because I was a mature person who had actually basically established themselves in the hometown of Brighton. And so there was only one institution I could go to. But I love that learning environment so much. And with my admin background, I went in and I got a job as a departmental administrator and worked my way up to a faculty manager. But I was always looking at data. I could never understand why peer observation results were fantastic, but the module results and student satisfaction was quite low. I would have students coming in moaning about academics. I would have academics coming in moaning about students, and I'm sure I moaned about everybody. So what I realised as I started in that role is that the concentration was in the first 2 weeks. Now, this is back in the 90s, don't forget, but sometimes it can still feel like that. You know, we bombard students with information. You've had it. You should know what to expect. And of course, life's not like that. There was very much a them and us, an admin versus the academic, and there was also very much the centre versus the schools, the faculties. And so there just seemed to be tension. And there was increased diversity, but it wasn't really looked at. And I started to realise that as students progressed, as the academic scaffolding may have come down, the personal very often went up. And this is what I realised. It didn't matter the role we played in any way, shape or form. We were servants of the learning imperative. But it depended on the role and the level that we looked through. So if you were in finance, you'd be looking at the student through the lens of are they home, fee status, EU or overseas. If you're in disability, it would be the support that the students require. But in the classroom, the students were all faceless. They were mere learners. But of course, there is also sector and institutional and course levels that we need to be concerned about. And the panel discussion later on reflections on delivering collaborative enhancement activity is going to be with Luke, Nicola and Phil. And Luke's just going to say a few words about what that session's going to entail. He's fibbing, I did warn him.
And I'm finished now.
Do you want to repeat that? You're trouble, Luke, seriously. And we all know this famous quote. There are known knowns, and there are things that we don't know, and there are unknown unknowns. And part of what we do, if we're going to support students, and importantly, our staff, we need to understand what those unknown unknowns are. So, for me, I started to kind of pull apart what was needed. And there were a whole range of things that we needed to consider. It was understanding the transitions. As I said, back in the 90s, all it was were the first 2 weeks and all other years were forgotten. We've got to take into account sector changes and challenges. Now, sector changes and challenges are not a new thing. It may feel it because of cost of living and COVID. But, there were students always who've had to make tough decisions. Again, as that mature student, I had to make the decision, do I go and get paid for a full day's work or attend one lecture on one day? It was a no-brainer. I copied my friends' notes or photocopied them from the lecture. Increased student diversity. This is really important. We've seen diverse qualifications coming in. Universities are no longer about traditional qualifications, traditional students, and they haven't been for a very, very long time. But it only feels like now that we're really, really paying attention to it. We've got social changes and challenges, and we've also got to be thinking about engagement, belonging, and compassionate leadership when we look at the whole integrated approach. So let's look at understanding transitions. Our students come in from all over the place. It's not a linear journey. We have students going in top-ups, going direct entries into certain levels. They come from international franchise colleges. They come from external foundation providers and international. And the reason why I started to realise this was so important, 20 years ago when I was at Kingston University, we had an entire cohort of Sri Lankan students come into the top-up, and the entire cohort was accused of plagiarism. And I'm thinking, well, hang on, how does that work? Because we hadn't onboarded them. We hadn't told them about how the university functioned and what our academic principles were, because they do vary. Again, postgraduate, important. We have a whole range of students from all over the globe coming in. And so I started to realise that basically we needed to pull the transitions journey apart. Very often, the first 2 weeks is called induction. No, it's not. It's arrival and orientation. That's all it is. So basically, first contact and admissions is exactly what it is. But that is where we should be setting the expectations. Unfortunately, in times of competition, it very much is, let's just pack them in, let's sell the marketing dream and actually not deal with reality. We all know if students are aware of the reality, they're better able to plan. The pre-arrival is very much about getting the grounding, the onboarding. The arrival and orientation is merely that. It's the first 2 weeks, students getting their timetable, figuring out accommodation, the commute, how to find their way around campus. Bombarding them with information at that time is pointless because they're not going to absorb it. How many of us have joined a university and within the first month we've got to do all the online training? I don't know which fire extinguisher is red or green. I've forgotten because literally I did anything just to get through it. Induction to study. Now that can be a semester or a year long, depending on how your year is structured. In the slides that you've got, you'll have a mapping and the definition of all these stages, so don't worry about jotting anything down. And just as we induct, so we need to reorientate and reinduct our returning students. And it's very important that all students go through these stages because a direct entry into level 5 or level 6 or level 7, 8 has basically got to go through the first 4 stages before they can join the existing cohort. And how do we actually help them embed and feel like they belong in a cohort that's already established? And just as we induct, so we have to outduct our students, even if they've decided to withdraw. Because by outducting them in an effective way, university, tertiary education may not have been right for them, but they may go around and say, do you know something? It wasn't right for me, but Dundee were brilliant. Abertay were fantastic. And actually, it wasn't right for me, but it may be right for you. And most importantly, the key area that you must focus on is the course. So many times institutions put the emphasis top down. Students don't care about a vice-chancellor, they don't care about a dean of students. The course leader is absolutely pivotal. And if you want students to engage in key pivotal information, push it through the course in a drip way that allows the information to be absorbed. It's no different from how we live our daily lives. So, as I said, the first 3 stages are pivotal, especially in actually getting students on board, helping them stay the course, and getting them to bond with the institution. So, When we talk about, especially those areas, let me just go back. When we talk about the 5 themes, which are curriculum, pedagogy, support, finance, and employment, it doesn't matter what activity you're doing. Think about the impact of that. Consider what you need to think about. So, for example, let's look at placement. It's a reorientation, reinduction stage. But when the student goes out on placement, what have they learnt in the curriculum and assessment that they can take into the placement? Pedagogy. What skills can they bring from the placement back into the course? They're still going to need support when they're out on placement. They pay a fee and they're entitled to it, but do we actually effectively do it? Finance. How can they budget? Especially if the internship or placement is maybe unpaid, how are they going to learn the skills to be able to manage without the stress of the cost of living and everything else? And employment. They've got to get the placement. So what is their CV being written like? And then once they've done the placement, how do they enhance their CV through everything they've learned? And I've applied that basic rule of thumb, and at the end of the slide, you've got a template that if you wish to use it, you can map it out for any activity. It doesn't matter what area of the institution you're in. You could be in estates, but it's still very important. So when we look at the pedagogy and learning, Emily McIntosh, who worked on this for numerous years, this is a really, really good model in helping people think about what needs to be considered within the pedagogy and learning theme. And we're going to have 2 sessions. We're going to have Pedagogy for Transitions by Phil. And Phil's just going to say a few words on what that session is going to be about.
Hello. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Luke, for fixing that. Morning, colleagues. So I'm Phil Storier. I am Interim Vice Principal at Dumfries and Galloway College. Delighted to be here today and talking about our project on pedagogy for transitions. A wee bit about how that came about. I suppose in my role, I've been in FE about 15 years. There'll be many in the room, but my biggest frustration is that certainly in my current role, I spend my least amount of time talking about learning and teaching, which I see as our core business. It's our main product is high quality learning and teaching, and we talk about it least. And I think that what that led to us in the initial days was discussions around what impact does pedagogy have. It wasn't from a particular stance of good and bad. It definitely wasn't a stance that one sector at that point, FE or HE, was doing it better or worse, so it was different. It was just the idea of the project is to understand what impact does the learning and teaching practice have for transitioning students. Also, I would stress it's not about, we're not approaching this from the position of that we are solely preparing FE students to transition into a current incarnate of HE teaching. This is about institutions sharing practice, bringing together and understanding more coherent practice so that that transition for students in terms of their learning experience is less of a lottery, shall we say. There's more certainty. And what we're trying to understand is whether or not effective sharing of practice, the effective dissemination and sharing of similar practices actually could support students through enhanced confidence, shared skills, because let's face it, the transition for me is about their ability to participate once they have transitioned on to that next level of learning. So that's what we are looking to explore, and I'm looking forward to sharing a wee bit about where we've got to so far with that. Here's Nicola.
Thanks,
you want
Phil.
Nicola just now?
And we've got Nicola, who's going to be talking about transitions
Great.
learning.
Is this what it is working? Seamless. Good morning, everybody. My name's Nicola Mulholland. I'm also undertaking a mini enhancement project, I think that's what it's called. Not so many now, though, now that I've got the data in. And the mini enhancement project that I've been working on is around about transition learning, and primarily based on what the tertiary sector does to support individuals to move into higher education, whether that's straight from school or if that's from college into university. We know that we have the National Schools Programme. However, what I know from my position in my own college is that there is a lot of good work that goes on in both colleges and in universities that's not directly linked to that particular SFC-funded programme. And the purpose of my project was to try and get that good practice to come to the fore and see what the sector is doing, how the sector's using the Scottish qualification and credit framework to support those programmes that are either learning programmes to support that transition or guidance programmes to support that transition. And what meta skills are being developed through those guidance and learning programmes. So yes, looking forward to telling you a wee bit more about it and sharing some of the data that I've managed to get. Some really interesting outcomes, particularly in and around the meta skills that people have identified as being part of their programme. But also what I'm going to share with you is all the mistakes that I've made. so that when those involved in the more formal STEP programme that we've been working through this year can avoid those mistakes. So I'll be sharing a wee bit more about that in time to come. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicola and Phil. Fantastic. I look forward to those sessions. As I said, realistically for me, students do need support. And the reasons why students withdraw is multifaceted. But in all of the years that I've looked after students and worked with students, if they will do everything in their power, if the course is right, to stay on course. It's when all the other mess gets in the way that basically students struggle. One of the things I've always argued for is that we need an integrated national learning framework. If we understood the skills at every single level of study and every qualification, we would be better placed to support students. A bit later on, there is a link to a book based on a pre-arrival academic questionnaire data that I've done over the sector over numerous years, looking at students who enter only with A-levels and only with BTECs. And the bottom line is this: it's not the qualification that's the issue, it's the onboarding. Universities are still designed for traditional qualifications rather than applied and vocational. And if you think about it, the way universities want to go, if you're applied and vocational, you should be rocking it. But it's all the other disadvantages as well that's associated with students who do different qualifications, which I'll talk about later. But we're also going to have a couple more sessions. We've got Dr. Josh Patel, who's over here, who, if you'd like to just briefly say about your Four Nations approaches to tertiary collaboration, that'd be great.
Hello. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm Josh Patel. I'm a researcher at the Edge Foundation, which is a small independent foundation based in London, primarily interested in post-16 TVET. We developed an interest in the enthusiasm, particularly across the Four Nations, particularly in Wales, but has been advanced obviously in Scotland, around kind of tertiary, not just as that kind of neutral definition of post-16 education, but a kind of understanding of the holistic direction of that kind of sector. But I was interested more in the sense of moving beyond the kind of policy incentives and ideas and towards actually what changes for the student. So we'll be exploring some of those themes and talking a little bit about some of the similarity to the other speaker earlier, about some of the failures, about some of the restrictions and the data that I've been able to find on that. Thank you.
Brilliant. If you could pass the mic to Luke. And you're going to talk about student success through institutional alignment, Luke.
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces that you're hinting at there is around the personalisation of learning of students and how we clarify and set the expectations, whether at college or at university, about what success looks like. And certainly your work around pre-arrivals, our work around diagnostics, again, all those sorts of things feed into that. So we'll be talking a bit about that.
Fantastic. Some great sessions coming up. And of course, what we've got is the QEF overview. And this is really a real movement forward. Because as institutions, we tend to work on policy. And what we realise is policy is very restrictive. And so by having principles, it provides flexibility to be able to develop processes that can actually work for your student body. The student body at UEL is totally different from the student body at Oxford. And so actually having principles allows flexibility to support. Also, which I think is really, really great, is it's an institutional co-creation, really joining up information. And it's based, the premise is based on accurate data. And all of this is important, which I'm going to touch upon a bit later. So, we have loads of data in the sector. Loads and loads and loads and loads and loads. And as I was after I created my transitions model and really started to flesh it out, and the only reason I did it was I wanted something pragmatic to help me develop initiatives within my institution. And then, of course, as I started to show it to colleagues, they started to find value in it themselves. But what I realised was students who get to the end and complete those all-important metrics that we're weighed, measured and judged by, NSS, are only the people who got to the end. It's not about the people who started. I told you I was a mature working-class female. I'd been out of learning for quite a while. I forgot how to learn. On the very last day of the Christmas term, I went to my pigeonhole, that's how old I am, to pick up my first piece of assessed work. And I got 40%. And the feedback was, you could have tried harder. I was devastated. Who was I trying to kid that I was capable of this level of study? My parents had been saying, don't go. Yes, my friends had gone, but it wasn't the whole group. I mean, I was at school when you could leave at the age of 16 with having taken no exams. So even if you went on to do A-levels, hey, that was a big thing. In the January, I can honestly say that was one of the worst Christmases I ever had, beating myself up. I went to see my head of department who talked me down. And basically, I did stay the course. But it was a very tough lesson. And I see that still with our students. The imposter syndrome, the self-doubt, especially if they come from backgrounds which traditionally, they don't go on to higher education, even further education. So I realised that to understand and support students, we needed to go back to the very, very start of the journey. And so I've been doing pre-arrival academic questionnaires for years and years and years now. And it was formalised via a £3 million research grant between 13 and 16 across 11 universities that I created and led to look at the postgraduate talk. We needed to re-energise the the UK domicile postgraduate market because it was plummeting. And so that was where it was really formalised. But the pre-arrival academic questionnaire provides a meaningful activity that's done at course level. So students don't know they don't have to do it. So you get a really good high completion rate. They also get feedback within the first 3 weeks. So they know what they've said is fed back to them. And invariably, I will give them sways, information that you can play with on your mobile phone. I will record videos that course leaders play in core sessions saying, did you know that 85% of you are worried about fitting in with your classmates? Don't panic, this is normal. So it's about during that wobble week period, weeks 4, 5 in, that actually you can hopefully re-engage and readjust how students are feeling if they're actually feeling a wobble. But it also feeds into institutional processes. And I'm going to show you some of the findings a bit later. These are the sections, but all of this is very much what STEP's about. It's about that discovery, trying to inform, trying to get a good, strong foundation. We're doing a national pilot, Advanced HE, UEL, across England as a pilot, potentially to run out a bit like PTES and SAYES for institutions that are interested. There are numerous reports here, and a lot of these just show the challenges of different students with different characteristics. So if you're interested, they're open access. But what's really important as well, whether you're staff or whether you're students, is resources. Now, the Joseph Rowntree talk about resources being not sufficient to meet minimum needs. But Ed Foster, a dear colleague of mine, has really mapped this into higher education. And resources needed for engagement are knowledge and understanding, skills and abilities, personal capacity, motivation and self-belief, peer and colleague influence. All of this within a sense of whatever you have is meaningful, it's available, easily accessible, and it's safe. You can explore. And we were talking last night about resilience. I think the whole sector has become so tied up in not allowing students a safe space to fail. Failing isn't failing. Failing is learning. But that also helps build resilience. And I think, we need to rethink what resilience is and how we actually get our students to learn through safe failing. Now, you've got slides for this, for postgraduate taught, postgraduate research. This just maps out all of the pressure points, typical pressure points that students feel through the different stages. So in your leisure, do read them. And if you know those pressure points, then you can provide the information to be able to reduce those concerns and those worries. And importantly, let's think about staff pressure points. Because if we don't look after ourselves, we cannot look after our students. So let's look at sector challenges and changes. So I'm going to sort of throw it open. What challenges and changes have you seen in the last, say, 5 years, for example? Anyone brave enough to put up their hand? Table over here, we've got two.
I was just about to say the COVID.
Do you want to say
pandemic.
who you are and where you're from?
Oh, sorry. I'm Dunia, and I'm from Abertay University. And I would say the COVID pandemic was a big change and challenge for the sector.
And I think your colleague next to you.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm the Democracy and Rep Coordinator at Abertay Students Association. Certainly in the past few years, the rise of generative AI and the sector's response to that.
How are students feeling about how they could be weighed, measured and judged by it?
Absolutely bloody terrified.
That's the technical term.
Yes, that is the technical term. I've written that in reports. Very confused about what is acceptable use of AI, what they are allowed to use with AI. Some people won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Others are using it to support their learning, but still getting caught up in AI checkers on their virtual learning environment. Other people have AI support built into their support plans and keep actually getting disadvantaged via that.
Absolutely. Anyone else like to sort of maybe mention any concerns that they've kind of noticed seems to be more prevalent?
Funding cuts.
Funding cuts, absolutely right. Day doesn't go past when the pressure on staff seems to mount. It seems like higher education, tertiary education is free game to be fundamentally criticised and ripped apart. And the pressure is on everybody. And that's why it is so critically important that we look after ourselves. Day doesn't go past where policy doesn't come out that we're expected to engage with. But this is one of the reasons why the framework is so good, because if you're based with principles, you're not having to adhere rigidly. You've got some flexibility. So we're a sector, especially in England, that focuses on league tables and metrics where you're weighed, measured and judged. Reduction of resources. Getting institutional collaboration, especially if you've got a really big institution, is very, very hard. And there's lack of information about the changing body, which is why a pre-arrival academic questionnaire is so powerful. So let's look at Scotland. In terms of application rates, what we do know is that there has been an increase from 24 to 23, but the levels 4 and 5, the direct entries, are more at risk, and they have basically gone down. Scotland, I'm not quite sure what's happening in this end of cycle, because you seem to have kind of gone really dipped in 2023 and then shot back up again. But in Scotland, it looks like actually you're not too bad. If you look at Scottish providers with Scottish students, yes, there has been a decline at master's level, but that is a sector-wide issue, especially for UK domiciled related students. Your first degree, slightly, but it's a bit static. But in England, the situation's far worse. You can see, actually, your institutional credit at undergraduate's gone up. So is this a market that maybe you can really start to expand? When we look at English students in Scottish institutions, you can see it really has gone down quite a bit, especially at the master's level. And even in the first degree. So you are not getting as many English students coming to Scottish institutions. We can see that the 18-year-olds are going up, and the 18-year-olds are supposed to go up until 2030. But what we are seeing with all the positivity is the percentage of 18-year-olds going on to higher education is actually decreasing. So this is something else we need to think about. But importantly, mature learners are going down. So all sorts of things that we need to be thinking about when we're actually looking at our markets, because understandably, that's what we do need to do, but also how we provide the support. So with the UCAS applications, we are finding, and I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, so don't worry about reading in any depth, but we've got more and more students coming through clearing. Many have released themselves from the first choice and gone into clearing, and some students have come into clearing for the first time because they hadn't even thought about going to do a degree or further study. And so again, they will have missed that whole onboarding if they've come through clearing for the first time. So they're, again, special group of students that we really do need to look at in terms of the information that they need. Increased student diversity. Again, this is why understanding prior learning experiences is so useful, because we have a better understanding with that increased diversity. We know a lot about incoming students, about the characteristics that impact on their retention, their progression, and their levels of success. We also have the challenges of managing expectations. Can I ask, is anyone here in marketing? Whew, that's lucky. We know this. We have images of fabulous experiences at university, tertiary education. That was never my reality. It's not the reality for many students today. And, you know, we need to be mindful that students need real models. Because if you've got real models, then actually you can sort of say, oh, they're not different from me. Okay, that's how they've managed it. But to promise all things that it's going to be fantastic, it's not reality. And so I think there needs to be an injection of reality to manage the expectations and to stop disappointment, and also to help that engagement and that belonging. If we're promising that you should be this as the perfect student, well, I can't match that, therefore I'm not. And as my old Vice-Chancellor said, a degree is just a rung on the ladder of lifelong learning. So, I'm going to do a really uncomfortable exercise with you now. Luke knows this, so please do not say anything. Right, so welcome to Bubbleton University. I'm the Vice-Chancellor, and the facts I'm going to give you are from the Higher Education Fudged Facts Association. So, would anyone like to be brave enough to tell me maybe the characteristics of this student? He's a mature student. Anyone else? What about this student? Anyone? Yes. He's a disabled student. Well done. Whenever I do this exercise, everyone cringes and they just don't want to say anything because they're worried that they're going to say the wrong thing. Let me give you some characteristics. This is not uncommon. Our students have complex lives. So, let's take the disabled student. He's in a wheelchair. He can't use public transport and he can't drive, so he has to take a taxi. That taxi service is basically, although they know they've got to get him for a 9 o'clock lecture, he won't necessarily always be able to make it on time. If recruitment don't tell the timetabling team that this student is in a wheelchair, how can they timetable accessible rooms? What happens if the room is on the 6th floor, there is a fire, and the lift doesn't work? How's that student going to get out? The mature veteran commuter student, carer of elderly parents, and he's also got a young child that he's got to drop off for 9 o'clock, which means he can't make that 9 o'clock lecture, so he's always going to be late. And then if the carer of his elderly parents is a problem, he's the main carer, he can't go in. And so you can start to see the challenges. The PGT International Transgender Student. University of Bubbleton, we only have male or female accommodation. So you can start to see how the student characteristics are really important in impacting on ability to engage. Social changes and challenges. COVID, you're absolutely right. COVID was a bolt out the blue, and it fundamentally changed things. We did hybrid, and then literally having learnt the benefits and the flexibility of how that could impact on the curriculum and engagement, in effect, we got the 3-line whip from government to say it's all got to be back in face-to-face. and all of the challenges. So all of a sudden, we've had that flexibility ripped away from us. And that, especially amongst colleagues I know in institutions where I've worked, has really created a tension of, well, but it worked, why can't we keep what is good? And so that's problematic. The other thing is, this is not going away. COVID isn't going away. And I'm going to show you some statistics from the pre-arrival academic questionnaire which highlights this. So, if you knew the attendance of your undergraduates coming in, that just shy of our half had 80% attendance at school and college or less, how's that going to impact on your class at university that you teach? You know, we know that colleagues are very frustrated that their classroom seems empty. But this is something that will impact on the classroom because of behaviour that has been established at school and college. The reasons: I had a long commute to school and I experienced a lot of illness. But also look at the increase in, I struggled with my mental health and well-being at the very end, and I suffered from insomnia. Now, we know insomnia has gone up phenomenally. You're going to see some stats a bit later. And a lot of that is put down to mobile phones, tech devices, etc. And so these are all things that affect us in the delivery of tertiary education. We know that mental health and well-being is on the increase. Care experienced students are almost 3 times as more likely to declare. And it wouldn't surprise you that engineering, medicine, and dentistry have the lowest declaration. But is mental health and well-being a new thing? No, it's not. About 7 years ago, when I was at Bournemouth University, I was on a student union panel looking at well-being, having a discussion of well-being. And there was a 17-year-old vlogger who was there, telling her about her story and about how and why she was literally doing podcasts about mental health and well-being. At the age of 14, she said that she suffered challenges in life. And at the age of 17, she attempted. I sat there, and 33 years separated us, but our stories were identical. At the age of 14, I was anorexic, I had challenges, I had an alcoholic mother. At the age of 17, I did the same thing. Difference was, when I did what I did, it was a shameful thing. The doctor said to me, pull up your bootstraps, just get on with it. We have a much more different environment, and that should be embraced, and that should be encouraged. Because reaching out is really, really important. We don't want Bristol to happen again. We don't want the Eberhard case to happen again. The sector, especially the departments who deal with GDPR, you need to get this right, because course leaders need to know certain information to actually help them manage what they need to do. So here are some of the reasons why mental health and well-being is on the increase. None of this is new. Why do we expect students not to experience anything like this? It's life. And as I said to you, insomnia is on the increase. And here in 2022, there was a study that 34% of children between 7 and 16 had a problem with sleep 3 or more times over 7 days. And for those 17 to 23-year-olds, it was 64%. And very often these students slept in, which is why they were late to class. So these are some of the concerns from the September 24 UEL PAQ. Undergraduate concerns, fitting in with new classmates. It's really not a surprise. Lack of information how to study mental health and well-being. If we know these concerns, then we're better able to provide the information to support our students. The postgraduate one, and I'm not quite sure why the PGT top concerns hasn't come up. Let's just, no. Lack of information about how to study. Why should a postgraduate taught student know? If they've been out of study for years, why would they know how to study at postgraduate level? Coping with the level of study, mental health and well-being. But concerns of undergrads and postgrads do vary, so it's really important that you don't lift and shift initiatives that are designed for undergrads to postgrads, because there will be differences. And as this classic slide says, you know, you've got to be more nuanced. You've got to be able to deliver it in a much more flexible way. Mental health and wellbeing. There's lots of resources out there, and if you haven't heard of the University Mental Health Charter, do have a look at it, even if you don't sign up for it. They've got a great structure that helps institutionally you to look at the kind of areas that maybe you could improve, enhance, things to think about. And so there are links here to the information. And Student Minds is actually opened up the registration for institutions wishing to maybe just get involved and have a look. So if you're interested, do that. Supporting staff and wellbeing is essential. It's probably, that is the first thing. You say on an aeroplane, you know, if the gas masks come down, you put yours on first before you try helping anyone else. And that's why we really do actually need to make sure that our staff are supported. So something that I did based on my transitions model, back in 2020, I started thinking, one of the problems is, when I talk to academic colleagues, accessing information in a single source, if a student comes to them concerned, distressed, or even for students being able to help themselves, you go all over the place on your intranet to try and find key information in different pages. So how could we draw it together? And so I thought about wellness spheres. It's not a new concept. It's been in existence for many, many years, and the common ones here you can see on the slide. I wanted a framework that represented the study life cycle. I wanted a one-stop shop. I wanted something where the definitions were similar for students and staff, but we could actually provide support for staff and for students. But also, if you go back to what Ed said about reducing the poverty of resources, of that knowledge, of the skills. And so I created 10 wellness spheres. And this is on one page. It's behind the firewall, so I can't actually show it to you in an interactive way. But these are the kind of the key areas. So as a member of staff, if you're looking for your own support, HR have done a version of this. But if you're a member of staff or you're a student, you click on one of these. There's a very short definition of why it's so important, tips, and all the links on the intranet site in one easy form of access, and a 1-minute video of a student explaining why it's so important. So let's look at, again, the social challenges. I said to you, as a mature student, I only had one institution to go to. I never visited it before I started, before I accepted a place. So, you know, first day, I'm sort of running around trying to figure out where my first session is because I wasn't intelligent enough to actually think, right, let's go and do a recce and kind of figure it out before I actually go on my first day. Undergrads at UEL, just shy of over a third, have visited no institution before they agree to go or actually rock up. And for postgrad UK domiciles, it's even higher. This doesn't include overseas. You would expect overseas not to. That's why it's only UK domiciled. So who are those who are most likely to come through clearing? Mature, those who obtained their highest entry qualification earlier and had taken time out. Students with caring responsibilities, students with an impairment or disability. Those most likely not to visit, mature students, white ethnic group, and those who's got siblings who've gone before them. And I suppose they've got maybe the cultural capital, maybe they've gone to the same institution as their sibling. And those staying at home and studying. And so these are all really important things in how we onboard students effectively and make sure we give them the key information that they need. Busy slide, but I'll just quickly talk through this. There is a common assumption that because of COVID, students learn online in schools and colleges. They may have looked at a screen whilst their tutor or teacher was talking at them, but invariably they were handwriting notes and using a course textbook. Colleges have always had basic VLEs, and VLEs have come in more commonly, but ultimately, after COVID, everything generally reverted back to normal. Yes, students may access in schools information via Seneca and other kind of very, very basic platforms, but they still take most of their notes through handwritten notes, course textbook, and although they may do coursework on a laptop, they do handwritten exams. And so it's about not making assumptions that all those students may be socially and financially, digitally experienced. They're not necessarily learning digitally experienced, and that's essential. And I think there is mass assumptions that has changed. We have increase in mental health declarations. We have poor attendance in school and college that we need to think about. Cost of living affects students. Knowledge gaps, especially if students have had long time off sick in school because their attendance has been below 80%. Lack of confidence. That's also important, regardless of the age. And as I said, the prior learning experience is really important. Understanding digital resources is essential. And digital poverty, as we know, can impact on learning. We know the students who had to share a laptop during COVID, who wouldn't turn their camera on because they didn't want students to see maybe their living conditions. Oh, okay. I thought I'd actually done a transition. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Do you think international students are more likely to use an Android phone or an iPhone? If you think international students are more likely to have an iPhone, put your hand up. If you think they're more likely to have an Android, did I say Android before? Android, put your hand up. You're absolutely right. But what's really interesting is at my institution, we created a platform where students, via their mobile phone, could actually use a self-certification extension for 7 days. Except when we built it, we were having problems because students who had iPhones, the software wouldn't accept it. Who knew? And so it's all of these little things that we do need to think about the students and the technology that they use. The age of the mobile phone. You know, for many, a third, it's over 2 years old. So how do our platforms interact with the technology that a student has? Monthly package, many don't know. But international students are more likely to have a lower package than UK domiciled. And so these are all the kind of things that maybe we forget about, that we need to think about. In this survey, 10% of undergraduates expected to use their mobile phone as their main device to access learning material. So how can we support those students? When we talk about using generative AI, for the majority, they don't. Are they aware of it? For those that do, it's mainly Grammarly and ChatGPT. How many of you use the spell check and grammar check on the Word facility? Isn't that a form of Gen AI? Am I going to be accused of, you know, when I submit my essay, that actually I've done something wrong because I've used technology to look at it? And so, as you were saying, it's really about defining and making sure that we really kind of very quickly lay the foundations of this. And I know there's a lot of fear amongst my academic colleagues, you know, saying, well, you know, how do we deal with this? Well, actually ask a student as maybe an assessment to produce a piece of work using Gen AI and then critique it. So how do we change the assessment? But we need to be doing it pretty quickly. So engagement, belonging, and compassionate leadership. How do we measure engagement? What COVID did was throw everything out the window. And we know from the complexity of our students, actually, attendance is not engagement. I'm just saying. How many of us are sitting in meetings because it's all gone online, digital to save money, and we're sitting there looking at the agenda, and then all of a sudden an email pings into our inbox, and we just sit there quietly kind of, you know, responding to it. Students are no different. And so again, it's about how we look at and monitor engagement. So, show of hands. Who's most engaged, student 1 or student 2? If you think it's student 1, put your hand up. Okay, thank you. Let me give you a bit more information. Student 1 is not involved in extracurricular activities, but student 2 is a course rep. If you think student 2 is more engaged, put your hand up. Oh, let me give you a bit more information. Student 2 lives 15 miles away and uses public transport, does all the reading, and has 12 contact hours. But maybe that's why they do the reading, because they only have 12 contact hours. But student 1 has 25 contact hours because they're an engineering student and does limited reading. Who's most engaged now? You can start to see the problems. Let's give you a bit more information. Student 2, split over 4 days, undertakes 15 hours of paid work. It's a 23-year-old care leaver. Student 1, dyslexic, 20, doesn't undertake paid work, but the timetable's over 2.5 days. So you can start to see the challenges that we have in determining what engagement is, attendance, but also creating that sense of belonging. When you look at those 2 students, who has the greatest sense of belonging? Belonging is about feeling. It's about a sense that is unique to them. For me, belonging was sitting at my table at home in my poly sweatshirt doing my work, whereas for my 18-year-old counterpart, it was doing a student union activity. When we actually ask what helps students belong, having support that is formal with their course, connecting with others on the course. This is why the course is so important. If we want to bring in other bits, try and bring it in through the course. And I know that's a lot of work for the course leader, but the course leader is absolutely pivotal in creating that stability, that sense of belonging, that engagement, and pushing key information through that route. And unfortunately, so often, it's not. Course leaders and the course leader role should not be a route for promotion onto something else. The course leader is pivotal to the survival of an institution. So there's lots of links here for belonging. But one of the things that I started to flesh out as well is belonging is a sense of feeling. But what creates that belonging? Is it being made to feel significant, important, and valued? And these are the common words when we actually ask students just to kind of write in a free-form box. The common words used by both undergrads and postgrads were support, academic support, help provided, respect, kindness, heard, listened to. When we actually look at the words that undergrads had, but not postgrads, understanding, accepted, caring, encouragement, patience. Postgrads, personalised support, recognition, check-ins, acknowledgement, known by my name, fair treatment, appreciated. And so you can start to see how maybe we need to broaden the concept of what belonging is and actually look at the aspects that make up belonging. Liz Thomas and Mike Hill also talk about the importance of compassionate leadership in an integrated approach. And that is absolutely essential. And the link here is to the report if you would actually like to do that. So, as I come to the conclusion of my presentation, these are the main areas that we need to consider. And if you want to look at all the pressure points, Advanced HE asked me to put them into a document, especially during COVID, but many of the pressure points are exactly the same. And COVID is still on the agenda, so actually it's still quite a very pertinent document. In the slide deck, you will have a whole range of slides for the transition stages of what we need to think about for each stage, setting expectations for first contact at admissions, academic integration, and the kind of questions that students will be asking themselves. So there's one for first contact and admissions, here's the pre-arrival, and you've got them for all the other stages. Here's a whole load of links to useful information that may help you. We know the journey is never easy. And unfortunately, marketing very often, in the marketing information, suggests that it is. Telling students about the real journey is always helpful. And as Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. I go back to the one thing about information. And I'm going to leave you with a poem. And I'd like to thank Rachel King from the University of Edinburgh who brought my attention to this poem. And I think when I go through it, you'll understand. It's called Knots. and it's by R.D. Laing. There is something I don't know that I am supposed to know. I don't know what it is I don't know, and yet I'm supposed to know, and I feel I look stupid. If I seem both not to know it and not to know what it is I don't know, I'm stressed. Therefore, I pretend to know it. That is nerve-wracking, since I don't know what I must pretend to know. Therefore, I pretend to know everything. I feel you know what I'm supposed to know, but you can't tell me what it is because you don't know what it is that I don't know. You may know what I don't know, but not that I don't know it, and I can't tell you. So therefore, you will have to tell me everything. So, in concluding, if we're going to inspire new generations to engage in higher education and the benefits and to invest in it, we need to make sure that no student is forgotten or left behind. And we need to adopt inclusivity in everything that we do. Activities, sustainability should therefore be achievable. So thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi. So my question is regarding the theme of belonging that you mentioned towards the end. And you mentioned how lectures are pivotal in that, but I wonder if, based on your experience and your knowledge, there's anything student-led that is also important, whether it's like initiatives, group initiatives from students to enhance that sense of belonging.
Students are pivotal. Students don't listen to people like me. They listen to fellow students. To actually have peers giving the message of reality is one of the most powerful mechanisms that you can help to create change. Because students will see themselves in other students. They won't see themselves in a 57-year-old female academic. And so actually incorporating and working hand in glove with students' unions is critical. Back in 2000, when I moved from the faculty into the centre to work with Professor Mary Stewart, who then went on to be VC of Lincoln University, she said to me, Shell, she said, we need to work hand in glove with the students' union. Publicly, we need to maybe work together and put on a combined, unified face, but actually, behind the scenes, they need to keep us on our toes. They need to challenge us. They need to keep questioning, and they keep meaning to push the envelope, which is why institutions working closely with students is so important, and co-creation is important. The one thing I would say with co-creation is this. Very often, students will think they know what they know, but they don't know. And so actually, it's our responsibility to tell students what they don't know, basically what the poem says, and correct misconceptions and assumptions. But having the voice of the student to create the narrative, almost as a case study, is invaluable because students will resonate, students will see themselves. And that's why actually having diverse students telling their story and how they manage to get over or that deal with, create that resilience, manage the journey at university, which is tough, is very powerful.
Any more questions? I think we've got a couple of minutes.
Thank you. I just wondered if you had any ideas about how to destigmatize failure for the students, so making it feel more like part of the learning process.
Right from day one in schools, students are basically... We need to put more informal learning into the curriculum. If you're an engineer or in the sciences, you go into a laboratory and you can, through experience and practice, screw things up, you learn. But how can we do that in humanities, in other disciplines? And I think that is something that's really important as a society. Failing is considered bad, but actually failing is learning. Failing is not failing. As my brother would say to me, and as I said, my brother, he left school at 16 with 2 CSEs, metalwork and TD, and basically they hadn't diagnosed him as dyslexic. He was written off. but he got an apprenticeship, worked night school, went on and went in to Brunel University for an integrated degree, then went to Warwick and MBA. And I am so proud of my brother from being basically tossed to one side. He has just received a second King's Award for his engineering business. So, you know, from failure to something is good. But my brother would always say to me, Shell, you know, you'll always know more than you did, but if you don't do it, you won't know. And so when I created my transitions model, I was actually working in the Faculty of Engineering at Kingston, and I would go to my colleagues and say, well, look, what do you think? If we'd use this, no, that makes a very logical structure. I'm not sure that if I had been in Faculty of Education, I would have had the same feedback because of discipline behaviours, in effect. But what's really important is providing time and space. When we run semesterised modularity, and you've got to do everything, you've got to fundamentally teach in 12 weeks and then do the testing, there is no time to pull things apart if students don't understand. It's why some institutions are going back to long and thin, to build in flexibility and time to go and revisit. And if that's the case, then try not to pack a module full of so many things to provide that flexibility of learning. And I think actually we need to revisit curriculum design, curriculum style, and content. Phil.
Yeah. Hands up all over the place here. I think we've probably got time for one more question. All right, I will come to Phil.
What was your
go
on? Whilst you walk to Phil, what was your question?
It's okay.
No, go on. What's your question?
My question is about the transition program itself, because to me, excuse my business management or marketing terms, it goes beyond transition. We're talking about restructure of the higher education and also something like the radical innovation or new business model for higher education. So my question is, to what extent are we ready for this kind of change? Because it's radical change. Very valid points. I totally agree with you and great. But when I think about the barriers, like you've mentioned some of them, it's so difficult to apply all of these points into an institute, in any university or college. So it requires huge level of resources and huge level of restructure. So
I can't really respond to that because I think you said that very neatly. They are challenges that we've actually got to think down the pipeline because, we know higher education everywhere is in a crisis situation. And so we do, you're absolutely spot on, we need radical thinking about how we actually move forward. Yeah. Phil.
Hello. I'm particularly interested and pleased that there was quite a lot of mention within your work about staff and people working in institutions, particularly that curriculum leader role, who are often sandwiched between the kind of strategic priorities and the reality of what's happening. I guess through some of that work, have you any insight around, I assume what it takes is really strong leadership, because I feel that what we're trying to do is we understand where we maybe need to go around the student experience, but we're trying to do it within the existing systems, structures, committees, and the performativity that has slowly crept into education over the last however many years. Have you any insights in terms of, or ideas of where that has been done particularly well? For example, curriculum. We can only really do that work in curriculum if institutions are going to create the space and the safe and the protected space for staff to do that. They can't do that and keep up the minutiae and the reports and the reporting. So it's an interesting point. I wondered if you had any insights through your work around what staff feel around how they do that.
I could bring both comments together, actually, because we're trying to evolve and adapt in still a restrictive culture, and that's very problematic. One of the things that I've been going on about for many, many years is, universities function on year-long courses, known income. One of the things I would like to see, if we really wanted to gauge business into higher education, is why aren't we doing micro-credentials? At postgraduate level especially, chunked up learning, that gets credits. And if we had the lifelong learning entitlement at level 7, and one of my arguments is you need to include PGT, because if I'm a student who's got my 3 years or 4 years, and I've got 1 more year left, why shouldn't I be able to go and do a Gen AI, MSc, module and just pay for that. And maybe the business will actually give me the time off work instead of me having to do it in my own time because it's going to be of benefit to the company. They may even pay for it. And so I think, we are trying to evolve within a restrictive culture still. And what you're saying is we need to rethink the model to actually make it survivable. We're not super-proofing the pipeline in terms of the changes that are already happening. We're seeing already postgraduate doing again. We are reflecting, we're going back to 2010. We can see the pattern, but we're not thinking differently to do something about it. And this is very frustrating. And I think at the moment we're working with one hand tied behind our back, whilst being restricted with all the kind of the policy structure, which is why the principles is so helpful and so useful in providing flexibility. It's going to be very interesting to see how institutions may be a bit radical through the leadership to go and do something maybe different. But again, when funding is king, that drives so much of our behaviour, and that's really problematic.